Today, we're diving into a really fascinating and honestly pretty complex story. It's about how the Korean church, which started out as this single powerful force, ended up splitting into so many different groups. It's a story of conflict, conviction, and surprisingly, growth. This is the mission history for the third week of August from Pastor James Huang. So that brings us to a really tricky question, right? Can division actually lead to growth? I mean, our gut reaction is no way. Division sounds like failure, like something's broken. But what we're about to see in the history of the Korean church is, well, it's a lot more complicated than that. These splits had consequences that nobody saw coming. Okay, so the term we're dealing with here is schism. It just means a major split caused by, big disagreements. And what's really interesting is the perspective Pastor Huang brings in. He points out that even the very first church, the one in Jerusalem, was eventually scattered by God. And that scattering, which is a kind of division, right, is actually what pushed the gospel out into the rest of the world. So let's keep that idea in our back pocket as we turn our attention to Korea. So before all the drama, there was unity, and the early days of the Korean Presbyterian Church, they were really promising. It was a time of healthy, energetic faith. Let's rewind and see how it all got started. And look at this timeline. It shows just how fast things were moving. I mean, think about it. In 1885, it all starts with a single missionary, Underwood. But just a couple of decades later, they've got their own seminary, they're graduating their first pastors, and get this, they're even sending out their own missionary. This church had some serious resilience. It even stood up to the immense pressure to worship at Japanese shrines during the occupation. It was truly a golden era of growth, and everyone was on the same page. But then, 1945 happened. Korea is finally liberated from Japanese rule, which was this moment of incredible joy. But almost immediately, a totally different kind of crisis started brewing, this time from the inside. And that unity that had been their biggest strength, well, it started to crack. So the first big split was all tangled up in that painful history with Japan. You had Pastor Han Zungdong, a man who had refused to bow at the shrines, and he started asking some really tough questions, like what do we do about the church leaders who did collaborate? The debate over purity and forgiveness got so heated that his group just broke away, and that's how the Koryo denomination was born. And believe it or not, that was just the start. Fast forward to 1953, we're talking right in the thick of the Korean War, and another division happens. This time, it wasn't about the past, it was about theology. A pastor named Kim Jae-joon started introducing more liberal ideas, and these ideas directly challenged the conservative bedrock of the church. The result? Yep, another split, creating the Kijong denomination. And if you want to see how this stuff affected everyday people, just look at the story of Yeongdong Church. It was founded way back in 1897 in Mokpo. But in 1953, this single church was literally ripped in two by that big theological debate. One half went with the more liberal Kijong side, the other half stayed with the conservative Yejong side. Can you imagine? Friends, neighbors, suddenly on opposite sides of the street, worshiping in different buildings because of a high-level dispute? It really shows you how personal it all got. So you might think things couldn't get more divided, but those first two splits were really just tremors. They were setting the stage for the big one, the largest, most significant division in the entire history of the Korean church. If the first splits were cracks in the foundation, this next one was a full-blown earthquake. And you know how it is with huge conflicts, right? It's often something seemingly small that sets everything off. In this case, it was a scandal over a seminary construction project and a well-known pastor named Park Hyung-young. That whole mess was basically the spark that lit the fuse on years and years of tension that had been simmering just below the surface. So what was the real fight about? It all boiled down to one big question. How should the Korean church relate to the rest of the Christian world? On one side, you had the Tonghop group. They were all for joining the global ecumenical movement, to work together with other churches. But on the other side, you had the Hapdong group. They were dead set against it. They were worried it would water down their beliefs. And on this point, there was just no compromise. So in 1959, the church split right down the middle into these two huge denominations that are still around today. Okay, so let's pause for a second. This whole story is just filled with painful arguments, broken friendships, and divided churches. It brings us right back to that question we started with. How on earth could any growth come out of all this mess? Well, this quote from Pastor Huang really gets to the heart of the paradox. He says, "Division is not good, but in the history of this division,
God made it an opportunity for the gospel to expand. Look, the splits themselves weren't a good thing, but what happened after was wild. Each new denomination basically started competing with the others. They raced to plant more churches, to send out more missionaries. This rivalry, this need to prove they were the right one, actually created this massive, unexpected explosion of church growth all over Korea.
And that really leaves us with a big question for our own time, doesn't it? This history is a powerful reminder of how fast disagreements can tear things apart. It makes you wonder, in today's world with thousands of denominations, what does real Christian unity even look like anymore? What's the common ground that should hold all believers together, despite all the differences? Pastor James Huang, who served as a missionary in China, now ministers in Maryland, USA. He is a researcher of Korean mission history and delivers his book, Remember and Repay, 52 Weeks of Mission Meditation, weekly.